Hello and welcome to another in the Making PPM Simple webinar series. I'm Christopher Claunch. I'm going to be your host today. And, your PPM Toastmaster, if you will. And today what we're going to do is we're going to have the How to Work in CA PPM through Microsoft Excel webinar. What I'm going to do is go through a little bit of housekeeping, talk about kind of the functional way we navigate around in the webinar today and how you can participate as a listener. And also we're going to go into some of the topics, a little bit of background on us, and then I'm going to hand it over to Federico to get into the technical side. And so on that note, for those of you that may already know, we have Federico Pena. And Federico is, for those of you that don't know, is sort of a pioneer in the PPM space. And I guess the biggest news of all is that today is actually Federico's birthday. One of the things that you'll notice, especially if you've been hanging around on our webinars over the years, is that we're going to go through a little bit of a change today. One of the things that we did is we reached out to a few of our PPMers in the PPM community and asked them to share with us a couple of the use cases that they were experiencing. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to utilize those use cases to illustrate some ways that we may be able to help you with your PPM environment and making it simpler. Now you'll notice on the screen that there's a GoToWebinar control panel. And in that control panel, it says questions. And so along the way, if you come up with a question, just go ahead and type it in there. And what Federico does is he operates in a particular syntax, but when he comes to pause, either I'll stop him and notify him that there's a question, or he'll just take a look, and he'll address those questions as they're relevant to the content that he's presenting. Now, in addition to that, as I had mentioned, I had solicited some feedback from some other PPMers, and a few of the community members were gracious enough to go out and take the time to provide those with us. But if I didn't happen to reach out to you, or you have a particular use case, I encourage you to go ahead and just put it in the question section. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. You could just simply say that I'm really struggling with cost plans for this reason. And as we bring that up, Federico will address that along the way as well. You see, one of the things that we've tried to do over the years, and one of the reasons that we're bringing you this particular webinar, is that it's just part of the quest for us to try and help you make your PPM a little bit simpler every day. So in thinking of those use cases, just remember that anything that might make you pull a hair or two out of your head each day, something that's a recurring frustration, throw it in the box and we'll see if Federico won't address it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually turn it over to the birthday boy, Federico Pena, and let him get into the technical makeup of the webinar topics and how we're going to approach that today. Federico, you ready to go?
I am, and thanks, Christopher. First of all, I want to thank everybody for attending this particular webinar. Today, as Christopher mentioned, we did survey a bunch of the people that have registered for the webinar, asking them for particular use cases that they would like to see us show inside of the Excel interface. We basically came up out of all of the suggestions that we received. I would say that cost plans and allocations were by far the most necessary, followed by, PPM administrator role of doing staff reorgs or mass changes. We will be talking about the benefits and flexibility of working in CA PPM through Excel, but there's a big reason of why we wanted to have this webinar, and we wanted to talk to people to find out really what their needs are. And after discussing with a lot of our clients why they use the Excel, I would say that most of them, it's not necessarily just because it's a time saver, is because it helps with data accuracy. And we're going to try and cover that a little bit once we get into it. But like I said, the webinar topics today are going to be staff reorgs. So we're going to cover probably, we'll do project manager leaves the organization. What do you have to do to extract your projects and change that project manager for somebody else? or a particular resource manager leaves the organization, what do you have to do to change that resource manager on all of the resources? Then we're going to cover cost plans. So we'll do a cost plans live demo, and then we're going to do an allocations live demo. As Christopher mentioned, these are particular use cases that were brought to us by end users, but the particular scenarios that we will be doing during the demo is extract data from Clarity, manipulate that data, validate that data, and then push that data back in. Okay? Now I know that I just moved, I switched slides, I accidentally touched on the keyboard, but I might as well go ahead and move on to the next slide. So we're going to talk about benefits and flexibility. All right, so there's save time and money. So in general, you know, it's very time consuming for a project manager to be able to update cost plans. Why? Because it's very tedious on the number of columns you can see, the number of rows you can see, and you can't really do a copy, paste, drag, drop kind of functionality like you can with Excel. Okay? But where is the big value? Okay, you can say, well, you know, we can take a project manager that's going to take, you know, a few hours to update a cost plan, and we can turn it into a few minutes, right? Because now that you can copy it into Excel, you can visualize all of the data in Excel, make quick edits, and upload it back into Clarity, okay? But really, where is the value for the organization, okay? And the value for the organization is really in data accuracy, okay? What do I mean by data accuracy, okay? I'm going to give you a perfect example. You know, we have a client that says, well, you know, we're not necessarily sure if we're going to do the cost plan interface through Excel because we only do update cost plans once a year. And I asked him, well, why do you only update cost plans once a year? He said, well, because it's so time consuming to update the cost plans that if we were to update them monthly, our project managers would do nothing but update cost plans. So, you know, the response I always tell them is, I go, well, how accurate do you think that data is? You know, everyone knows that projects change all the time. You know, there's scope creep, there's everything. So all of the values within inside of projects are changing on a daily basis. So if you're only updating that data once a year, then when it gets to your C-level executives that have spent millions of dollars on reports, right, how accurate do you think those reports are? You know, that data is stale, it's a year old. So then, you know, we go back and you go to the C-level executives and they go, you're spending millions and millions of dollars on your CA PPM tool set, but really you're only leveraging a very small percentage of the data because it takes too much time and too much effort to update the data so the data is accurate. So when you're pulling out the reports are of data that happened a year ago or 6 months ago or 8 months ago. And we find similar scenarios occur with allocations. And it's strictly, and sometimes it's not necessarily that people don't update them. So people say, well, yeah, that changed from 90% to 80%. So they just turn around, they ballpark 80% for all of the other values, and they click save and go. Why? Because it's too time consuming to be able to manually update each field. So they try and figure out a way to do it automatically. What happens when you do that automatically is you're really letting the computer do the project management for you, which, and it isn't really the project management, it's just updating the data for you. But at the end of the day, nobody's getting a clear picture on the data that you have in your organization. So, you know, the whole purpose of this Excel is to make all of the end users of CA PPM look like heroes to the executives. How? By maintaining their data accuracy and providing them an accurate picture of what their CA PPM data should look like. So what does that mean? Very low TCO, big ROI, right? You know, this is a tool that's easy to implement and your results are extremely quick. I'm going to get into, like I said, the demo component. And the demo component, we're going to cover a few parts. We're going to do staff reorgs, as I mentioned before. On the next one, we're going to be doing cost plans. And last but not least, we're going to be doing allocations. I'm going to go through this particular slide here quickly, just for everybody. And maybe, Christopher, if you don't mind, if you can put some of these links directly on the chat for everybody.
I will, yeah.
One of the key components is, the product guide and tutorials, right? You can go to our knowledge base and you can see all of the information regarding the Excel interface. There's product briefs, there's pricing, as well as the resources for the particular Excel interface. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get right into the demo. But first of all, I have seen some questions come in, so I'm just going to undock my questions.
Yeah, so the first one looks a little bit like a use case around downloading a task list from multiple projects and using the data for standardized time reporting. I don't know if you can somehow incorporate that into the demo a little later.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely try and do that.
Okay, and then there is there's a comment, Federico, that says time equals schedule. Federico, you may understand what that means. I don't particularly. And then there's a question about a sandbox, which I'll answer directly in the answer panel here. So.
All right. So I'm gonna get right into the demo. So the typical delivery model for this, so there is no installation on the end user's machine. What they get is an Excel file. Okay, so I'm going to open the Excel file. The difference between this particular Excel file and a regular Excel file is this contains a macro, and within inside of the macro it has a couple of additional components. The first component is it has a custom ribbon. Okay, this custom ribbon contains the logic that allows you to connect into Clarity. So within inside of here you have a login screen. Let me just drag this login screen over here. Okay, so that asks you for the URL that you want to connect to within inside of Clarity, and it asks for your Clarity username and password credentials, as well as an email. And the email is where you're going to be getting notifications, and we're going to cover that in a little bit. Okay, so the first thing you do is you log in. To test your login, make sure that you can log into that, and you save that. Okay, once you save, we can close that particular login screen. Okay, there's a little button here that says Update Lookups. This Update Lookups button is used for data validation. Okay, and when I say data validation is you want to make sure that whenever you're entering resources, that particular resource exists, or a particular lookup value, make sure that it exists in Clarity to try and ensure that the end user doesn't enter any inaccurate data. Then we have three basic functionalities. The first one here is you get data. Okay, you notice here from the get, you can get data from either Clarity or from a template. In this particular scenario, we're going to be saying get data from Clarity. So what that does is when you click on get, it connects to Clarity and extracts the data that you've specified and displays it for you. Now, if you said template, what it's going to ask you or prompt you for is for an Excel file, okay? And that particular Excel file, let's say you wanted to do, I don't know, you have somebody that is filling in an Excel sheet to populate a bunch of fields, okay? Well, he saves that as an Excel file, and then you can import that in as new data, okay? Once you get the data, okay, then we manipulate the data, and then we have a button here that says validate, okay? What that does is that goes through the whole Excel sheet and validates the data to make sure that the lookups are correct, that that you have the right data types, that kind of thing, to prevent end user errors. And then last but not least is load. So we load that data, and like I said, we load that data back into Clarity. So the first demo we're going to cover is, as we mentioned, is the staff reorg, okay? So when I click on the get, what do I get? I get a list of all of the interfaces that I have access to. And a lot of the times you might say, well, the project manager, I'm only going to give them access to the project's interface, maybe the project team's interface, and allocations. So you can limit which interfaces each end user has access to. So in this particular view, because I'm the admin, I have access to all of them. So here I'm going to click on projects. Okay. Then we have some pre-configured filters for the project interface, but in this case, I'm just going to say, get me all of the projects that are within inside of Clarity. Okay. So down here, you can see it says now it's formatting the project data. So in this little status bar down at the bottom here, it actually specifies what it's doing as it's getting the data. So the first thing it does is it does a web service call to Clarity, extracts the data, brings it out, displays it, and then positions it the way your particular Excel interface has been configured, right? And what I mean is, what order the columns show up in, and if you want any color coding or any of that for your data. Okay, so in this case, we're going to say we're going to be doing a staff reorg, and I'm going to select myself, and let's say in this case this particular project manager has left and we need to replace him with a new project manager. So I'm just going to do a replace, and I'm going to say I want to replace fpenna with admin, and I say replace all, and it says okay. So you notice the first thing it does is it highlights all of the cells that it modified. Okay, so there's a big advantage to this, and that's because it lets the end user know what he's modified. So he wants to validate what he's modified before he pushes that data back into Clarity. So you can take a look at all of the fields, right, and make sure that nothing got modified by accident, right? So in this case, I'm going to say, yeah, that's perfect. That's what I wanted. And I'm going to take this one here and I'm going to misspell it. Okay. Now you notice the next option I have is just strictly to validate. So I'm going to click on the validate. Okay. So here it says I've got incorrect data. It's highlighted in yellow. Okay. So when I mouse over this, okay, it says that the following is not a valid manager. Okay. So I need to validate and make sure that I fix that data. Okay. So you notice that the load button is still not enabled. Okay. And that's because it knows that the data is not valid. Therefore, it's not going to let the end user try and push that in because it's going to fail. Okay. So here I re-click and I go and I say validate again. Now it says all data is correct. As soon as I click OK, this is now available for me to load that data. Okay. So now I can literally just click load. I get a little status indicator here. Okay. And it says that my request has been submitted. Please check your email for load results. Okay, so in a couple of minutes, in a couple of seconds, once I get that email, I'm going to show you what the results of that particular email was like. Now, I'm going to stop here for a second, and I'm going to see if you guys have any particular questions around this type of interface. So when I say this type of interface, we're looking at instance data changes, whether it be projects, resources, whether you're changing a manager, where you're doing OBS reorgs. So another couple of things that I'm going to cover with inside of here as far as validation is concerned. So for example, common questions is, can we have lookups be turned dynamically into drop-downs? So yes, absolutely, right? They can dynamically be turned into drop-downs, so you can't even let the end user make a mistake. We do data validation on Boolean. So here if I put and I revalidate this data, right, it automatically tells me that that data is incorrect, right, because it says the value's got to be either true or false. What other common questions get asked? Locked fields, okay. So you notice here, for example, we have template as a locked field. So that's also very common, if you wanted to lock particular fields, or if fields are even locked by Clarity Process Engine, it'll automatically lock them with inside of this Excel interface as well. All right, so I'm gonna open up, and Christopher, do we have any questions?
Yeah, the first question is how does the Excel or the validation in Excel know the manager name was invalid? Does it check it against the managers in Clarity?
Yes, absolutely. So it basically does a lookup check to make sure that he's a valid manager inside of Clarity.
Okay, and the next one is, can you, oh man, got so many questions. My question disappeared off the screen. Can you update project plans, tasks using the Excel integration?
Yes, I assume project plan, I assume you mean task information within inside of project plans. Absolutely. So there's a task interface that allows you to create or remove tasks from a particular project, as well as manipulate task dates. So you do this, let's say, at an object level. So when I come here, when I click on the get, right, we have a tasks interface. And this particular task interface basically brings the project name as well as the tasks that belong to that project. Now I know I did say remove. In general, Zog only allows you to create or update, with two exceptions. One is team members of a project, and the other one is tasks for a project. Those are the only two things that can be removed via the Zog API. So yes, absolutely update tasks, no problem.
Okay, Federico, the next question is all of this done through web service calls?
Absolutely. Everything is done through the Zog API. So there is nothing done at the database layer. So this is, is on-demand compliant or on-premise. And as far as deployment is concerned, there is no, I'm going to say no customization. There's only a very little configuration that needs to be done within inside of CA PPM.
The next question, Federico, is where do you define which data fields to load?
Where do I define which data fields to load? Basically, we have standard out-of-the-box interfaces, and maybe another item that we can provide is, Christopher, maybe after this we can everybody all of the out-of-the-box interface attributes. Okay, so that's basically what comes with the Excel. Okay, but then obviously everybody has different needs. So there is configuration that is available, and I'm going to cover at the very end of this webinar. Hopefully, I can spend a couple of minutes covering how you can configure, add, and remove. That's basically inside hidden sheets in here that contain the metadata that specify how you configure each integration. So everything is completely configurable.
Okay. The questions applies to all validations that would be done. I assume it must validate against Clarity data to be useful. What about free text fields? How are those validated?
Well, I mean, free text fields, if they're free text, really validation is very minimal. It's usually just string length, and you can specify a string length validation under a custom validation for each field.
Okay. Let's see here. Making sure I got to all of the current questions. No, I haven't. Wow, good job, team. Lots of good questions. Does a user's permission impact what fields can be updated?
Fields, no, because within inside of Clarity there is no such thing as field-based security. There's no attribute-based security. There's object-based security, but there's no field. What you can do on a per-user basis for that is you just do not display the fields that you do not want that particular end user to see. So, you might have, let's say you might have an interface for project managers, and you might have an interface for project manager light, let's say, and that would be, let's say, a project manager's assistant that you only want him or her to update the start and end date. So you only give them project name, project ID, start date, end date, and you don't give them anything else. So therefore, if it doesn't appear on the Excel, then they can't modify it. But so it's much easier to control than within Clarity, because within Clarity, the attribute-based security can only be really controlled at the subpage level, and the Zog API does not support subpage security.
All right, moving along. How the validation manager is done, you mentioned the lookup. Is it also through a web service call? If so, is that particular web service call available from PPM XL out of the box? I think you may have answered that, but
yeah, basically, when I first started the demo, I talked about the sort of update lookups button, and if I didn't talk about it, this update lookups button basically updates all of the lookups inside of a hidden sheet in Excel. It's so, because lookups don't necessarily change on a daily basis, it isn't something that gets done on an per interface call, because that makes it very slow. So what we do is you say, well, when you first start using the Excel, you update your lookups, and you might want to do that, once a week or something, and it really depends on the use. And that keeps your lookups, like I said, in a hidden sheet that I might have a chance to cover in a little bit, where all the lookups are stored and how all of that validation is done.
all right, and I come into the next one. Hi, can projects be filtered when get is selected instead of returning all projects?
Yeah, and I talked about this, and I'll talk about that more inside of when we get into the validation and some of the metadata. But in this case here, the out-of-the-box filters is either project name, project codes, and they accept comma-separated values, or manager, or a status. But in short, any single field that displays in the project interface is available for filtering. So yes, absolutely, any field, as long as it comes back in the interface, you can use it for a filter criteria.
Excellent. The question here is around whether we respect all constraints of clarity, like, for example, auto number, read-only, locked field, secure page restrictions, etc.
Almost. The auto-numbering is a tricky point, just because the Zog API has been notorious for having issues with auto-numbering. We do have an auto-numbering component, but basically what we do is you configure the Excel to have its own auto-numbering. So it doesn't utilize the CA PPM auto-numbering. Of course, if you are on premise, there is a solution we can give you, specifically if you're on Oracle, that allows you to utilize the auto-number. But like I said, the auto-number within inside of Zog is finicky, to say the least. So we recommend that you utilize an auto-numbering scheme directly from within inside of Excel.
All right. Does a user's permissions impact what fields they can impact in Excel? I think you touched on that as well.
Yeah, I covered that one already.
Okay. How easy is it to add a new custom attribute based on data model changes and clarity objects?
Fairly straightforward. It's basically, you need to add it in 3 points. The first point is you need to make sure that you have a way to extract that custom attribute. So obviously, if they're virtual attributes, if it doesn't reside in the database, it's very difficult to extract, right? So step number 1 is adding it to the query API to make sure you can extract it. Second is adding it to the configuration of the Excel to make sure you can visualize it. And third is mapping it back into Clarity. So pretty straightforward to do. I mean, like I said, this particular Excel interface comes with over 1,200 attributes, and we add tons of custom attributes for clients all the time.
Excellent. I think on that same notion, page-based security.
We talked about page-based security. The Zog API does not support page-based security.
Okay. And then what looks to be the last question for this segment is, if in Clarity, and pardon me, I don't have edit rights to projects, if I update the Excel, would it allow me to update the project if I don't have edit rights in Clarity?
No, no, no. It completely inherits your whole Clarity security model. So you must have not only rights for that particular object or sub-object, but you also have to have ZOG rights for that particular object. So it's an additional right that you have to have, but there's ZOG rights for every single object within inside of CA PPM. You have to make sure that you have that right as well as the right to do it via the UI.
Well, awesome set of questions out there so far, Federico, and thanks for answering all those. I think we can move on to the next segment, and I'm sure that'll generate a whole new series of questions.
All right. All right. So the next item that I think we were going to cover was cost plans. Okay. So with inside of here, I'm going to come down to the get, right? I'm getting data from Clarity. And I'm going to talk about why we're going to be getting data from Clarity as opposed to putting it in directly from Excel or building the cost plans from Excel. I'm going to talk about a couple of best practices on cost plans specifically, okay? So here I'm going to click on cost plans, and I'm going to just take a look at our, in this case, for our filtering criteria, what do we have? We have projects. You select the project that you want to work on for that cost plan. You could select multiple projects if you wanted, but in this case, because I only have one project that has cost plan data, I'm just going to say this one project, and I'm going to say get data with filters. Okay. So once again, if you look down at the status down here, it says, you know, it's done getting cost plan data from Clarity, right? So as it's getting the data, then it formats it, and cost plans are a little bit different than instance type data, the data that I just covered, because it basically has to take your data and pivot it into timescale values, right? So it takes, for every row, it takes your fiscal time periods and pivots it around those data, that data set. So that's why it takes a little bit longer to format that data. All right, and in this case, what's it doing? It goes in, and obviously this can be configured, but when I select by project, you could have multiple cost plans in a project. In this case, we're only getting the cost plans for the plan of record. Okay, and that's because that's what we configured out of the box for this interface. But that doesn't mean that that you're limited to just a plan of record. It's just that that's what we use. Okay, so in here we have a cost plan, and we have two group bys. We have cost type and transaction class, right? So you could, in theory, change it, but most people, what do? They take their cost plan, they build it in Clarity. So when I say build it in Clarity is, I'm going to open up a Clarity screen here so I can sort of show you what I'm talking about for this particular project. All right, so in general, what do people do? They build this portion of the cost plan in Clarity. And then when they pull it out in Excel, it basically pulls out in Excel the financial time periods and all of these values blank. And that's the most common scenario that people do. So they extract the cost plan and they go, oh, this isn't really 33, this is 55. So let's just copy this across this line. Now, I did do a little bit of color coding configuration on this just so you can sort of see what can be done as far as the configuration is concerned. You know, in this case, what do we have? We have green that specifies dates in the past, yellow for present, and gray for future, right? And you can do this in basically all of the grid-based integrations, meaning allocations or any timescale values, which are really helpful to let you understand really where you stand with inside of your timeline. So everything is configurable to give you a nice visual look into the display. Now, the other advantage is, for example, with inside of here, we provide the actual and the variance, but you notice that they're grayed out. That means that they're read-only, and that's because you can't update these values directly from Excel. Actuals usually come from within inside of timesheets or financial transactions. Okay. The other thing we do is, you notice anytime you make a modification, it takes the cell and changes the color of that particular cell. Okay. So that also helps the end user know what they've modified and what they've manipulated. Now, I can take this cost plan, let's say, and I'm going to just say I want to load this cost plan, okay, because I've made the changes that I needed to make for the particular rows that were necessary. So inside of the Excel, really, you have no limitations on the number of financial periods. So you don't have that constraint that you have inside of CA PPM, which is the number of columns and rows that you can display in a page. So it makes it very difficult for you to be able to validate, you know, all of the data that you've entered, because you can only do things one page at a time. Okay? And once again, the request has been submitted, right? So I'm going to check my email for results in a second. So I'm going to show the components of the email results for that. Now, we have been talking about, you know, doing cost plans, and always whenever we extract, we bring into one sheet. Okay. You know, the other thing you can do is you can always say, well, I want to bring the data into a new sheet, right? So now what this gives you the ability to do is it gives you the ability to extract multiple items at the same time and be able to exchange between sheets and validate data between two sheets, and then migrate the data together into one sheet and be able to load that back in, right? So this gives you the ability to visualize lots of different data at the same time. Of course, you know, you have to use common sense when extracting data out, right? You don't want to, you know, one of the things that we have clients do is they say, well, you know, I'd like to pull out all the cost plans in my system. Well, yes, I'm not saying that that can't be done, but you have to remember that no matter what, you know, cost plan data is extensive. There's a lot of data to fill each one of these cells. If you pull out, you know, all of your cost plan data within inside of your environment, you're going to end up with millions of records. And although Excel can handle it, you know, every time you do that, you're making a query to the database, and the database is chugging away. So, you know, it's like putting massive portlets on your homepage, right? It's just not best practices. You know, it's not that it won't handle it, that Clarity won't handle it. It will. It's just everything that you do takes longer. Right? So you want to kind of have a balance between, you know, user experience, usability, performance, and what the end user is looking for. Right? So a lot of the times we tell people, specifically with cost plans and allocation data, be careful and, you know, force some type of filtering. Right? Okay. Now that I've covered cost plans a little bit, I'm just going to stop and see if we have any new questions that have come up.
We do, Federico, and you know, they are with respect to that. We had a couple of questions around whether or not you were making these changes. Are they cost numbers or units?
So these values that we have here, in this case, like I said, which everything is obviously configurable, right? But these are the exact same values that we have displaying here. Okay, you notice I had changed those values to 55. Now they're all updated here inside of your cost plan. So these are the exact same values. In this case, they are dollar values.
And those are U.S. dollars?
Well, whatever your active currency is. I think, so yeah, this is the investment currency view. So yes, I think our system's set up for U.S. dollars, but
and that's also, if I remember correctly, that's also, you can change that to the whatever currency that people are utilizing in their Clarity. Is there an ability to change that currency if, let's say, it's the pound or the euro or?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But you'd never do that at the cost plan level. You usually do it at the entity level of the financial setup of your project. So this particular view is smart enough to know what currency your project is in, and it'll extract the data in that currency.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. It says another question we have is, can I add a new cost dimension here, or add a next transaction class and plan my cost?
No. So cost. The thing is, the group by, so you're asking for group by attributes. In this case, we have 2 group by attributes, and you're asking if you can add a third. you notice that this particular cost plan is now locked down, therefore a third could not be added. If you can't add it via the UI, then it cannot be added via the API. And the other thing that you wanna keep in mind is when you have your Excel open, right? This particular Excel, you have it configured for the number of group bys that your organization uses. So generally these are pretty static. You do your cost plans by particular group bys, and they're not really, it's not something that you have one project that utilizes cost type and transaction class and the next project that uses cost plan and resource class, right? In general, the criteria for cost plan organization is the same. So possible, yes. Adds a level of complexity, definitely adds a level of complexity, right? It has to be already pre-configured to bring out that additional dimension.
Going on to the next one, it says, can the time periods be shifted? For instance, the data is valid, but the project was delayed. Also, could it be both date and cost updates?
The thing is, with inside of cost plans, that's based on your the financial periods of that particular cost plan. So generally, the main purpose for the Excel isn't really to update the properties, because updating properties within inside of CA PPM is fairly straightforward, right? We come to the properties, right, and we change the finish period, and you're done. You save it. To actually update the details is really what's time consuming. So although it's possible, the Zog API supports it, it isn't something that we do inside of this. As you notice, we don't display the financial periods that we bring. We just strictly, we bring them and we pivot around those financial periods. But like I said, it isn't to say that it can't be done. It's just something that doesn't really make sense to do inside of Excel.
So just to clarify, that's done at the clarity level, and then it's reflected in the Excel. And then our best practice is to work through that. This is really awesome. Just so many great questions so far. I've got more for you. Can we create a fresh cost plan instead of updating an existing one?
Sure, but I mean, like I said, the thing is, and I'm going to go back to the why would you, right? If you have to do it in Excel, you have to go in and do line by line, right, to create a cost plan, as opposed to if we go through CA PPM, I'm going to go back to this view here. I can literally click on this little box and say copy cost plan or create a new one, right? It's much quicker. It's literally one button to do it through the CA PPM as opposed to trying to do it through Excel, which is going to be more data entry. So although it can be done, it just doesn't make sense to do that through Excel. It's easier to do it through the UI layer.
Okay. And so this question is, so are you recommending a cost plan in Clarity always is set up and extracted for populating the details? I think that may be sort of what you just said.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. And that's what we have for questions on this particular topic, Federico, if you wanted to move on to the next segment.
All right, so the next one that we're going to do, like I said, we mentioned, is allocations, okay? And in allocations, we have different types of filtering. In this case, you can filter by project, and as I mentioned before, you can filter by basically any field that comes out of the integration, but in this case, I'm going to select the same project, and I only want to filter by one project. I want to do just 12 periods. My period types is monthly, and the period offset is 0, which means it's going to get data from today forward. And the reason I do that from today forward is it doesn't make sense to manipulate allocations in the past. All right, so we get a very similar view to the cost plan data. Okay, so we pivot the data based on months that we have, right? So you can always manipulate the data, right? And literally, the advantage that you can do with inside of allocations, you could say, well, I don't want these guys working 1 FTE. I want these guys to work 2 FTEs for this project, okay? And we load the data. So manipulating allocation data becomes very, very simple to do with inside of of Excel. I'm going to spend a couple of seconds while this is loading. I'm going to open up my email, just so I can show you guys sort of what this looks like, what the notifications looks like. All right, so here, this is the email that we get, okay? So it just gives you a basic overview. From here it says, how many records were modified, right? How many Zog calls were sent, right? And if any failed, passed, or so on. And then you get a little Excel file, and you get an overall status of that particular load, right? So the status, how long it took, the load status, the updated, whether it were updated, failed, inserted, right? And any data validation that occurred that might have failed. So I'm gonna, since we only have a few minutes left, I'm going to see if we have any questions from anybody.
We do, and so one of them talks about, I guess, the best practice of utilizing Clarity. It says often there are many projects that are delayed, and Jeff would like to update both the dates and costs for each period within Clarity for all the projects, and then validate it and upload it back into Clarity. Then download. And there are multiple steps and systems to use, which distracts from the advantages of using this tool. And so in that statement or use case, I'm not sure exactly what the question is, or if that would be considered a detractor.
I'm not necessarily sure that displaying that data or allowing people to manipulate that data within inside of Excel would be an easy view. As I mentioned before, everything is possible. But like I said, it all boils back down to, usability versus not allowing end users to be able to make mistakes. With cost plans, there's a lot of different rules around that. But yes, everything is possible. As long as there's a Zog API, everything is possible. What we've done is we've covered the most common use cases, and that's what we include out of the box, right? But it's very rare that we roll out the Excel interface to somebody without some type of additional configuration that they're looking for.
Federico, the question was, is this FTE or hours?
In that particular case, it was FTEs, and for monthly, it doesn't really make sense to do hours, strictly because there's no 2 months that have the same number of working hours. So the most common scenario is FTE. Okay.
Can you modify assignments as well?
Sure, but that wouldn't be in that particular view, right? That would be, you would need to create an assignment interface, which is basically project/task/resource. But yes, absolutely possible to do assignments.
All right. Can periods be added in Excel for cost plans? Same question for resource allocations. Can you add periods?
Well, resource allocations, no, because resource allocations basically goes from project start to project finish. So if you wanted to change the length, then you would just change your project start or project finish, the same way that the out-of-the-box and Clarity functions. So it doesn't allow you to add time periods that are outside of your project start or project finish. So although, yes, you can do it, you wouldn't do it at the allocation interface, you would do it at the project interface. And I'm sorry, what was the other one? That was for allocations.
And cost plans. Can you add time periods for cost plans?
As I mentioned before, you can't, because the way cost plans are configured, once a cost plan has been defined, your time periods have been defined already. It's not something that you can just add rows, because as I mentioned before, we pivot that data. So you can do it, but not in the interface that I displayed.
Okay. Is it possible to see the cost next to the hours? And is it possible to add the department of the resource?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we utilize what's called the query API to extract the data. So as long as the data exists in the database and you can figure out how to query that data, then yes, anything can be brought out.
All right. Is it possible to add a new resource here? Going back to the last screen that you were on.
It is, but it isn't the interface that we would recommend that you add resources on. This particular interface is used for allocations. So if you wanted to add resources, add or remove, you would want to go to the project teams interface. So and that one's used for adding and removing team members from the project.
All right. How do you handle issues with network problems in connection to the Clarity? If it breaks while updating data in the Excel, could the changes be saved in Excel for upload later once the connection's reestablished?
It's a question that I'm not sure if I was going to try and not get into in this particular call because it's a long answer. But in general, what we do is we have a middleware component that throttles that and prevents that.
Okay, the integration manager that you're showing on the screen right now.
That is correct.
Okay, and I guess because of time constraints, we could either talk about that offline in a further discussion. It looks like there's a lot of good questions, and
I don't even think we've gotten through all of the questions yet.
We haven't. The next question just says that can you show the resource allocations piece?
That was the one that I covered. Do you want me to show it again?
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Let's do it. I just closed the Excel because I needed to open the report.
Here's what I think is an easy question. Does it have the same session time with what Clarity has?
No, because Clarity has a session timeout on the actual window that you're on. So it just depends when you open the session, when you modify, and when you make the save. In this case, I can modify here, right? I make a modification. I load. In this moment, it creates a session, sends the data, closes the session, right? Very different from Clarity where you're on the web, you're navigating through, you're doing your things, and then you open the session when you first logged in, but if you're not moving around, that session times out. That's not the case for here because the session's independent of Excel.
And I think that's what we have for questions. I'll answer a couple other ones here directly. And we have about 1 minute to go. Oh, did you show the resource allocation piece?
Yeah, I'm showing it as we speak. So I did a get data. I selected allocations. I filtered by a project. It brought me the allocations, and I modified those particular allocations in here. And then I clicked load.
Okay. Federico, we've reached the top of the hour. And what a extraordinary set of questions. I have to say that in in all of the webinars that we've done over the time, that was the most engaged and the most amount of questions we've had. So I'm super appreciative for everybody keeping it that interactive. And for those of you that didn't get your questions answered in total, I can get back to you with some further answers, and maybe we can dig into those and go through some best practices or some ways that you can accomplish the things that you're looking to do. Appreciate people exposing their use cases for us to help in that environment. That's been really exciting. So we did put those links in the chat for product briefs or product guides and tutorials, things like that may be also very helpful for you. If you need to contact me, maybe to set up some time to talk about this stuff and get some of our technicians on the phone to go through some of this stuff, we'd certainly be open to doing that. And also we'll send out a short little survey, and you could make suggestions about things that you'd like to see in our next webinar as well. But this has been fantastic. So we sure appreciate you guys taking the time to do that and for all of the thoughtful questions. Again, Federico, happy birthday. Thanks for taking the time to go through this in such detail. I sure appreciate it. And
yeah, I want to thank everybody for attending as well. I know that you guys are already running late, and I also wanted to say please do answer the questions in the survey. That way it'll help us build better webinars in the future. Specifically, if you have any specific questions or use cases that you need answered, we'd love to hear about that. And thanks again, everybody, for attending.